In this video, I want to talk a little bit about mindfulness and how it could possibly answer some of the more difficult questions we may be facing in our lives. If we're feeling dissatisfied and alienated in our own lives, it can really provide answers to those kind of questions. We can see that through the lens of meditation, that it is this service to this illusory self that is the most direct cause around happiness and overall mental suffering. So to really understand what service to this illusory self means, we need to understand what the self is, what types of self-worship there can be, and how meditation can be a solution. So what is the self? The self, in the context that we're talking about it, is that feeling of being a subject inside the head. It is that sense of separation of subject-object perception. And we discover that in meditation that this sense of being a subject inside the head is an illusion, and that what really exists is a singular condition of consciousness that contains all the sounds you hear, or the light, or the bodily sensations, or your thoughts. It all appears in this field of consciousness. Now, a description of the self is that it's a construct. It's a representation of what we are through the eyes of others. It arises because of our ability to be aware that others are aware of us. It's that sense of being self-conscious. It's that first moment when someone else looks at us, that we are now an object in the world. And that is the feeling of being a self. This illusion of self takes into account people's opinions, feelings, and small gestures about you to sustain it. It gives you name and it gives you form, when in reality, you are free of all of that. Now, what this illusion is and how it is created is different. Now, this illusion of self manifests because attention is lost in thought. It is this identification with thought that creates this illusion. Now, the difference really to be noted is what it is to be identified with thought and what it is to be identified with awareness. And this discovery really can only be made through meditation. And it is the repeated breaking of this illusion through meditation that really cements our understanding of it and really makes clear what this illusion is and why it manifests our dissatisfaction, our unhappiness, maybe our anxiety and fears. So now we have an idea of what the self is. The thing to understand is what self-worship is. And self-worship is really the continued service to this illusory self. And what that means moment to moment is how attention is resting in thought. If your attention is lost in thought, then you are feeding this illusion. Now, it does matter what kind of thought you're lost in. If you're constantly thinking about yourself, then this illusion's intensity is much greater. This is where we get into the different types of self-worship. Now, obviously, it's very difficult to highlight all the different forms of worship. However, the general formula is that if your lines of thinking are centered around yourself, then that's how you know you're in service to this illusion. A good example of this is vanity. If you're constantly thinking and worrying about how you look in others' eyes, if you're trying to project this image of self, that is how you know you're in service to this. Now, another not so obvious example is self-advancement. Our culture is so much in favor of it that it's very hard to see why this can be bad. But meditation shows us that this kind of narrow, personal pursuit of happiness really is very destructive, because it generates these states of mind of fear and anxiety, because ultimately self-advancement is an individual pursuit. You'll be living only to carry out your own narrow desires, viewing everything through this lens of self-concern. And meditation shows that this really is the cause of our unhappiness and suffering. Another form of service is self-gratification. So if you're feeding that part of yourself that is craving and in search for that short-term pleasure in whatever form that may be, this is a good indicator that you're in service to this part of you. And if you have enough mindfulness in the moment, you can see how that thought arises, how attention can be captured by it, and it is then acted out upon. To be in service to the self is really to be a slave, to simply act out every thought that arises. Now, the thing to understand about all these forms of worship is how they are self-oriented, how attention is captured by thoughts, and more importantly, thoughts about yourself. And it is in these moments that we find ourselves unhappy, fearful, and anxious. It is the consequence of our inability to care or think about anything other than ourselves. However, meditation really is the answer to these kinds of issues. It is the most direct form of transcending this illusory self. There are indirect ways of doing it, however, we won't get into that in this video. So why is meditation a real answer to all of these questions, and how can it help? To understand that, we need to talk a little bit about the different types of meditation. Now, of course, there are hundreds of types of different meditation, but I'm going to focus on three important, what I consider to be important ones. Now, there's object-based meditation where the focus of attention is on an object of consciousness. For example, the breath. Now, this is really important to build up a certain level of concentration, especially in the beginning if you're just starting out to meditate. And doing this for a little while will start to definitely show the fruits of meditation. You'll definitely be a lot calmer, generally more happy, and definitely less reactive to things. Now, the second type of meditation I want to talk about is metta meditation, or loving kindness meditation. And the goal of this meditation is to achieve this state of metta. And it's done through the repetition of phrases, of generating thoughts of well-wishing towards ourselves and others. However, the long-term goal of a meditation like this is to really change that internal narrative that we have. It allows us to have a healthy internal voice, one that isn't constantly critical and constantly self-oriented. We will have more positive thoughts and lines of thinking in our day-to-day life. It won't be this giant effort that we have to go through. The more and more we practice it, the easier it becomes, and the easier it is to have healthy relationships with people and to not be angry and constantly thinking negative thoughts all the time. It's this beautiful practice that opens up so much of the world and ourselves to us. Now, the next type of meditation is selfless meditation, or non-dual meditation. And it is in this that we really unpack this illusion of self. The important thing to really recognize in this type of meditation is that there is really nothing to transcend. There is nothing to overcome. There is only to recognize that consciousness is already free of self and centerless. Now, practicing this and stabilizing this form of meditation and recognition is really what is the jewel of mindfulness meditation. Dropping the self and identifying with awareness is what will bring to bear the good things that we really seek. Consciousness is already still, it is already peaceful and content. And being this for moments at a time in our lives is what will bring us happiness and joy and all that we really seek. Now, I do believe that these three forms of meditation are an expression of consciousness and what it means to live a good, wholesome life. And I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope you got something out of this. So thank you again, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.